Welcome everybody to another CTC webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, Technical Evangelist here at CTC, and today we're going to go through a comprehensive introduction on Schedule Excel. The reason we're talking about this is unfortunately because Revit has no real quality native way of importing Excel spreadsheets into the Revit environment. But, Spreadsheet Link, one of our other tools, allows you to kind of take data from Revit, pull it out to an Excel workbook, work on it, and bring it back in, but that doesn't let you bring in the graphics. We're going to actually go through and take a look at how Schedule Excel specifically can bring in and keep those graphics brought into the Revit environment from an Excel workbook. We're going to kind of cover a couple of major topics here. Accessing Schedule Excel, where you can find it, kind of going through the interface and how it works a bit and some of the settings. We're going to generate some links to an outside spreadsheet and bring that in, and also take a look at how you can refresh those graphics in the Revit UI based on whatever happens in the Excel environment. So without too much kind of death by PowerPoint, we're going to jump in directly and take a look at how this can work in the Revit environment. Now I'm going to be demonstrating this from Revit 2018, but you can use this Revit 2017 all the way through Revit 2020 in exactly the same format. So exactly the same functionality, all versions of Revit that our tools support. Where you can find these tools is up on the CTC Software tab when they're installed. We'll talk a little later on how you can get it installed, where you can find the download for it, but for now, when you do have it installed, CTC Software tab. And from here, you can actually go to the CTC Project Suite, and one of the tools on the Project Suite is Schedule Excel over here on the far right side. If I pull this off the ribbon, you can see the full project suite. One of the tools is Schedule Excel, and that's the tool that today we will be focusing on. Just for clarity, since I have all the tools loaded, I'm going to pull a few of these things off the ribbon just so you can see all the tools that are up here and know exactly where a project suite is, and it's not going to be like floating out on the screen there. So Schedule Excel, before you can really bring something in, you have to have something formatted that you want to bring in. And so I'm going to open up a file that maybe we can use for an import here. I'm going to, let's see, let's go find, if I bring this across for you onto the main screen, we're going to go down to the C drive. I've got some demonstration files sitting down here, and one of them is my Schedule Excel folder where I've got some notes, some architectural notes, or anything that's formatted. I'm going to use this because it's fairly simple in what it looks like. In my case, my architectural notes has a few tabs. I've got one called General Sheet Notes. It's got a little blank row here on row 2. It's got some text down here in A, B, and C. So it's got some general information kind of on this General Sheet Notes tab. I also have an abbreviations legend with some different fonts and kind of the same sort of layout, a little kind of shrunken down row 2 and a bunch of information. And this one's kind of long. In fact, I think I've copied and pasted this so that it repeats a bit. Yeah, right there's the repeat there at row 114. And I did that so that I would have a really long table to be able to show you how you can handle that in the Revit environment natively in the tool. You don't have to pre-break apart your Excel workbooks if they're too long for a traditional printed sheet. Schedule Excel will actually help you do that as well. So what I'm going to do is take this exact workbook here, and I'm going to bring this into the Schedule Excel environment. I'm going to move this off to the side. It doesn't have to be opened up in Microsoft Excel. I just had it there in case we want to go make some changes quickly. But let's take that file and bring it in. First, just the general sheet notes. In fact, I'm going to pull my schedules list up here so you can actually see my schedules when I bring this in. On Schedule Excel, when I click on the button from the project suite, what you might notice is a basic blank interface. And I have the ability to add a reference to an outside spreadsheet. I can modify paths if something was already in here or update some things. Those buttons are grayed out because I haven't imported anything just yet. I also have some options right here, and I'm going to open this up real quick just to kind of take a look at what we have. This has the ability to remember the size and position, so it knows what window or what screen my Schedule Excel window is on. It does enable the automatic updates, so when I open up a Revit model, if it has links in there, Schedule Excel will try to auto-refresh that if it's told to do so. It does give me a warning in case somebody does manually edit a spreadsheet, and I'll show you an example of that in a little while here. You have the default of only using the printable area on each worksheet. If you uncheck this, it brings in everything that it can find. Most of the time, the printable area is what you want. By default, it does turn on the auto update on sheets when it brings them in, so that this will actually trigger and do what it's supposed to do. You can also force it to maintain schedule cell sizes when it updates, so that if you forcibly modify a cell, it'll maintain that when it does the update for the data. I tend to not do this. I like to do all of my formatting in the Excel environment. And the default view type down here as well. I like using schedule views much more than drafting views, but you can try it for yourself and decide which one you like. I like to just get my settings configured, my options configured, before I start bringing spreadsheets in, so I can have an expectation of what the defaults are going to be. The installed defaults, I think, are just fine. That's what these are, is the installed defaults. But you can change them if you want to. So now that I have a spreadsheet and I have my options configured, I'm going to add a reference to it. So when I click Add, I can then open up an existing Excel workbook. You can do some authoring and some editing here yourself, but your editing is much more powerful in the Excel environment. So I recommend that you author from Excel and just open up a file that you've already kind of worked with. So I'm going to go browse for where that file was. In my case, it's sitting out here in my Schedule Excel sample data, and there's the same architectural notes that we were just looking at. When I open this up, here's my general sheet notes. Fairly basic, small, relatively, lightweight little spreadsheet here, but something that Revit itself wouldn't necessarily easily format for me. I can do paragraphs and lettered bits of text now in the latest versions of Revit, but I can't have things like titles and columns very easily with different sized text. If I have differently sized text and I want to have things like cell borders and stuff, that's a little tricky in the Revit environment natively, and I have to use a drafting view for that. So what I prefer to do is I prefer to, again, use this, an Excel spreadsheet. It makes this a little bit easier, and I have much better word wrap control and formatting control myself, I feel. You do have some graphics options over here for the specific sheets that you're bringing in. These I do recommend that you take a look at and validate, because the defaults may not be exactly what you want. I'm going to show you what I recommend for most people if you have a quality formatted Excel workbook. When I click on these graphics options here, this lets me control things like how cell heights are managed. Preserve cell height without applying auto correction for wrapping text is my preferred way. If you have your Excel model formatted exactly right, with all cells merged correctly and your cell height set up the way that you want it, this preserved cell height gives you the best fidelity. If your Excel workbooks are a little bit sloppy, maybe people haven't properly merged cells when text wraps across multiple cells, you might need to do some auto height correction, or potentially for the cell widths here, some auto fitting or auto merging some adjacent cells. This doesn't always give you exactly the formatting you want, though, so I recommend, again, having your Excel workbook formatted very clean. So preserve cell height, preserve cell width are my two preferred options. Down below, in my table layout, I do have this told to break into multiple tables whenever the table height exceeds some dimension. For today's example, because I want to break into more than just one extra table, I'm going to tell it if it exceeds 12 inches, printed height on a sheet of paper, then it's supposed to break into multiple tables. This one should not be taller than 12 inches, so it should stay as a single table, and that'll be fine. But my abbreviations legend over here probably will break into multiple tables, and we'll see that happen in a minute. You can do some things for line work overrides, and I let my cell borders not have any overrides, so it uses exactly what's going on in the Excel workbook again. It doesn't override anything, it just uses directly whatever I did in Excel. There's also the ability, when it does do a table break, if it needs to repeat things like table headers. In my case, I have row 1 being my title, and I have, for my column headers, just row 2, so it can repeat that on multiple tables if it needs to, and that's how my abbreviations legend is formatted as well. Down below, you can do things like applying font colors, so if there was color overrides in Excel, you could have that overridden. Cell backgrounds, if there was any of those, and we'll see an example of that later. And then there's also conditional formatting that can be used here as well. So if you are leveraging conditional formatting, this setup here in Spreadsheet or Schedule Excel can match all of that. Basically, if you can do it in Excel, you can pretty much do it in Schedule Excel. Exceptions being superscript and subscript. That doesn't carry across because Revit doesn't support that. and rotated text. Revit doesn't support rotated text either. So if you've got vertical text, for example, Revit can't handle that in its formatting. Therefore, our spreadsheet tool can't handle it either, and that's a Revit limitation. So what I'm going to do is, now that my settings were all correct, I just validated them and kind of talked you through them. What I'm going to do is bring in just this one tab, and we'll come back and do a second import for the other tab in a minute here. I'm going to bring this in as a schedule view, and the view name is going to basically use the tab name directly. And when I click OK, it's going to go through the exercise of actually building me that schedule right here. There it is, Z-Link Schedule Sheet Notes. And one of my other options was how I wanted it to prefix that view name, and I had it modified it to say Z-Link, so it groups all of my links here at the bottom. But in this case, you can see there's my general sheet notes with all the exact formatting that came in from Excel. It's a view now, a schedule view that exists here in my project, and it's told by default to automatically update. So if I put in some update in the Excel file, the next time this refreshes, it'll update here in the Revit environment as well. When I close this out and I go to a sheet, let's say I go to main floor plan. If I wanted to drop those sheet notes out here someplace, maybe I have my floor plan up here near the top of my sheet. Maybe I organize this a little bit better than it was. And I want to put my general notes maybe down here. I simply drag and drop this onto my sheet, place it wherever I feel is appropriate. And now I'm going to start seeing the effect of some of the line weights that came out of Excel. And I'll see all the exact font definitions that were in Excel also. In this case, it's all Arial fonts, but I didn't get any extra sized fonts brought into my project or any new text types. In fact, if I type in text here, normal Revit text command, I'll see that I have just a few text types brought in, and that was really it. Whatever they are. The actual text types coming from Excel don't get brought into this environment when I use the schedule option. And I'll show an example of that in a moment here with that other schedule where the header is actually using that Book Antica type font. I don't exactly know what the name of it is, but that's what I think it's called, Book Antica or whatever. That's the name of it. When I bring that one in for my cover sheet in a moment, it's using that as its header, not Arial. Let's go through that exercise and see what it does there. Notice this one wasn't taller than a foot printed on my sheet of paper, so it shows up as just one schedule. Let's bring in that full abbreviations legend and see what happens there. Schedule Excel, add a reference, open up my architectural notes, which in my case includes my abbreviation legend. I'm going to tell this to bring it in again as a schedule view. And in my graphics options, once again, remember that I told it that when I bring this in, the maximum table height is going to be 12 inches. So it'll automatically break this when it detects it gets above 12 inches when it would be dropped on a sheet of paper. So when I click OK here, what you'll notice happen is it's got this brought in, gave me 4 individual legends, broken into 4 separate things. There's my Book Antica font there at the top with Arial for everything else. And if I jump in, and here over here, you can see that my abbreviation legend gives me 1 link, despite it creating for me 4 different views. It manages that for me automatically as I bring this in. And then when I refresh this, if it gets longer or shorter, it'll automatically create or remove any of those as necessary, depending on what's in that particular tab in that Excel workbook. So here, if I start dropping those onto sheets, maybe I go down to my title sheet here, and I want to start putting those abbreviation legends out there, I simply drag and drop these just like I would any other schedule. Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3, and then the final one here, Schedule 4, which will be some shorter height, but it has all of the information, and you'll notice that it duplicated across all of them, those first 2 rows for my header and my title. And so in this case, I've got this Book Antica style font, and if I was to call up the regular Revit text command again, there's no additional font types over here because it doesn't need them. The schedules, the way that we use this, it doesn't create any new text types. That, by the way, is the primary reason when I'm using Schedule Excel and creating a link to an outside thing that I always prefer to use the schedule view instead of a drafting view. That's my preference. Drafting view will actually create line styles and text types depending on what's in your Excel workbook. It has to create them for different sizes, whereas the schedule view option does not. And the schedule view option also creates 1 object and 1 view, or potentially 4 views if it has to break it apart. but it does it very efficiently, whereas the drafting view has to draw lines all the way around all these different cells when there's lines and create multiple text types. So I really prefer not to use this. But again, it has an advantage once or twice here or there. Schedule view, though, tends to be the best. All right. Let's use an example here. I'm going to bring in another import where I want to bring in multiple tabs all at the same time, and I want to stack them up on this sheet. I have a code compliance thing that I created by using a workflow with Spreadsheet link, and then prepped this so that I could automatically fill out some information and use Schedule Excel to bring it back in. I've already done the Spreadsheet link portion of this, and if you want to see more about how that works, there's a recording on a webinar that creates our code compliancy, or what we call nonlinear fixture calculations. It's already recorded and up in the Spreadsheet link playlist on YouTube, previously done webinar. The Schedule Excel here, I'm going to use what was already generated by that to bring in multiple tabs. I'm going to add a reference. I'm going to open up that file. So I'm going to go out here and browse. I think it's on my desktop is where I put it. And so right here is my room calculations. I've got a multiple collection of tabs out here, water closet method 1, 2, and 3 with different settings, and you can see background cell infills and cell merges and some pretty specific formatting for this, all the way across all these tabs. I'm going to bring all of those in all at once. In some cases, there might be tabs you want to exclude, like my very first tab is the source of the data that this is using. I don't want to bring that in. And I've got a few extra tabs in there as well for some back-end data, again, formatting certain things and just doing some number crunching. What I really want, though, are these different methods of calculation. So I'm being selective in bringing each of those tabs in as Revit schedule views. When I click OK, in this case, I've selected 10 tabs. It's going to bring all 10 tabs in, and you'll see them start to populate down here. Water closet method 1, 2, 3, urinal calculation 1, lav method 1, 2, and 3 will pop in. And then finally, I believe there will be a drinking fountain, a DF tab. Yeah, there they all are. So it's bringing each of those in. I don't need to bring in all of them in this case. I'm doing this so that you can see it's very efficient to bring in multiple tabs from a single workbook if that's what you need. Each tab always will get its own specific entry. Even if I'm bringing it in from one workbook, each tab will get its own entry here, and it knows what the path to the file was. Right there's the path. I can do some find replace with that if I need to. I can update or reload it from a different location as needed if this moves around. But it brings in each of those individual tabs. And in my case, because of my options, it's told to automatically update all of them. So now I can start using those. Right? I can drop out, say, water closet method number 3 here on my sheet. And you'll start to see, again, line weights, background cell infills, merge cells, all of that is being maintained directly from what was happening inside the Excel environment. And so I can stack all these components together depending on whatever it is I need and whatever calculation methodology it is I was running, whatever region perhaps I'm working in. And the way that I built these up, because I was mixing and matching these, I put intentional line weights on different parts of these tables so that when it stacks all together, it looks like one continuous schedule. You can do some pretty interesting things when you start working with Excel in creative ways and by using Schedule Excel to bring that content in. Okay, let's do one final thing here. I'm going to modify, what tab was that on? That was over here on my main floor plan. There it is. Here's my general sheet notes, and I'm going to make some extra note inside of here, modify this a little bit to make it, maybe modify D, additional notes, to say something else. To do that, normally what I'm going to do is just open up that Excel file, which coincidentally I've already got opened up on my screen. And so I have this open on my general sheet notes right here, cell D, additional notes. I'm going to put in some other note. I don't know. Let's just put in some other note, right? And as I save this, when I go back into Revit, just like normal links in Revit, this doesn't instantly auto-update. Right? The auto-update from Revit happens when you open up a project. And that's how the auto-update happens with Schedule Excel as well. It auto-refreshes when the project is opened. It scans that file if auto-update's turned on, and it'll refresh it then. If you're in a model and you update a Revit project that's linked in, or you update an AutoCAD file that's linked in, you have to go to the Import and Links Manager, or sorry, the Links Manager, and refresh that, just like with Schedule Excel. In this case, when there's an update, it'll actually tell me if that file was out of date or if some other things are actually currently up to date. So it'll notify you if there's something that perhaps you should be refreshing. In my case, both of these two are actually out of date, and so I'm going to forcibly update the both of them. On my other monitor, it's going to go ahead and run those refreshes. And now that that is done, they're all up to date. And here you can see some other note, that note that I modified in the Excel file. It refreshed right here. There was no need, using the traditional workflow for Excel to Revit, of printing an image and importing the image. I'd have to manually refresh this, manually reprint an image and manually re-import that. Or if I was using the DWG link methodology, I'd have to, with the Excel file linked to an AutoCAD drawing, I have to open up the AutoCAD drawing before it actually refreshes it, save it, close it, and then come back to Revit and refresh anyway. Here, it's pretty much a direct link. Excel straight to Revit. Any changes that I make to the Excel file will update here. So final thing that I want to point out to all of you, it is important that you don't really make modifications here in the Revit environment. This is designed to be an update from Revit, or from Excel, directly into Revit. So if I go to one of these, like my general sheet notes, and I modify this note to something else, except for I didn't capitalize or smalls that correctly, but whatever. As I make that change, Schedule Excel is actually going to warn me. It says, you just modified this by hand. So anything that you modified by hand, that's going to get lost. This content is going to get lost the next time this gets updated, because it's always refreshing from what's happening in the Excel file. This is one directional. From Excel, the graphics coming into Revit. It's not bidirectional, because it's just looking at the pretty picture of what's in Excel and recreating that in the Revit environment. So that's fine. I can do that. But then the next time I refresh this, the next time somebody opens up this project, if I do this manually, because this was updated manually by an end user, if I refresh this, when I update this, it's going to go back to the original some other note. So make sure you make your changes in the Excel file at the source, and then when this refreshes into Revit, it'll refresh the Revit environment. That's an important note to make. Okay. Are there any questions? I'm going to jump back over here to the Excel, or to the PowerPoint here. Are there any questions that you want me to answer? If so, go ahead and ask them right now while I'm jumping over to show you how you can get your hands on this tool set if you don't already have it. The way that you can get your hands on these tools, if you go to the internet and you go to our website, ctcsoftware.com, right on the main page here on the products drop-down, you can go to BIM Project Suite 2020. In the BIM Project Suite 2020, that's where this particular tool set is found, is in the BIM Project Suite. Once that page loads, if you don't have the tools already, you can try them free for 14 days. You can also get information about purchasing from here if you want to, but you can try them for free first. That particular tool that we talked about today, Schedule Excel, is actually one of our licensed tools. So for 14 days, this tool will work fully, 100%. There's no limitations to that tool. After 14 days, it'll stop functioning unless you actually get licensing for it. But the nice thing is that these light-colored tools up here, these aren't ones that we're focusing on in today's example, but these continue to work. They're free forever. So feel free to get this suite, and you'll still get some nice benefits there. All right. There was a couple of questions that I noticed flow through here, and so I wanted to make sure I answered them. One of the questions was, will this work with a CDE, with files stored up on SharePoint or ProjectWise? The answer is, if you can browse to it in Windows, natively in Windows Explorer, then you can certainly link it with Schedule Excel. So if both SharePoint, well, I know SharePoint works with this, but if ProjectWise has a link to Windows and you can browse to it natively, then yes, you can actually browse to it through Schedule Excel, find the file that you want to link as long as it's some kind of a spreadsheet type file, and you can link that directly into the Revit environment. So certainly you could do that. The other question that I saw flow through was, did the text types automatically transfer to your Revit model, or do you have to create the text types before I actually use Schedule Excel? And the cool part here is that you don't have to worry about text types because Schedule Excel handles it entirely, and it does not affect your Revit model at all. So even though, like with that with that title sheet that I had over here, if I go back over to my title sheet, you might notice that one of my fonts out here is Book Antica. Nothing about that font actually got brought directly into my Revit models. There's no new text types to manage when you're using the schedule methodology. See, if I go here to the normal Revit text command, looking at my text types, there's no 1/8 inch or 3/32 inch or whatever size that is Book Antica font. It's just got the fonts that I defined in my project, and that was it. So there's no need for me to worry about having the fonts predefined or having it bring extra fonts in, specifically if I'm using the schedule option down here, schedule view option, when I'm doing view types. Otherwise, if you use the drafting view, this tool, Schedule Excel, when it's bringing spreadsheets in, will actually define text types for you that it found in the Excel workbook, which may or may not be desirable. If you've got a lot of varying font types, that might be inconvenient and undesired. So I would recommend Schedule View, no font worries at all. It'll take care of it all for you, and just live define them and use them in the schedule and not muddy up your text types in your project at all. All right. We'll kind of jump out here to the last tab, which is our questions. If you have any more questions, feel free to throw them in to the questions window. I'll hang out here for a few minutes and answer them. If not, I want to thank you all for attending the webinar today. We always appreciate when you show up to our live presentations and interact with us. Certainly, as you exit today, let us know if you have any other webinars that you'd like us to talk about, and we would be more than happy to cover those in future. Also, let us know what you thought about this webinar. We always take that feedback to heart, and we use it to help improve our webinars directly. And also, as always, these webinars are recorded. And so at the end of this today, we will get this all ripped up and ready to go and thrown up to our YouTube channel. And it will show up in the Schedule Excel playlist up on our YouTube channel. So certainly this is recorded and will be available in the near future. Not seeing any other questions roll through yet, so thank you all for your time today. We do look forward to seeing you in future presentations by CTC. Have a great day.